Okay, thank you. So a really big welcome to all of you this afternoon to today's training webinar, which is the second part of our training on how to score paper 1 of the PTEG, the Pearson Test of English General. This afternoon we're going to be looking at how to score the writing sections of the paper. That's sections 8 and 9. It's a follow on from yesterday's webinar. I don't know how many of you were here yesterday, where we looked at the listening and reading sections 1 to 7. So, as Ben said, my name is Faith Kent. I've worked for Pearson as a senior examiner in various capacities for many years now. Currently, I work as a principal examiner for paper 1 of the PTEG on level 3, and this is the experience that I'm going to be drawing on in today's session. So we've got lots to go through today. I really hope that this is going to be an informative and useful session for you that will provide insights for you as teachers that will enhance your candidates' performance in the exam. I don't know why this slide's going backwards. So again, welcome. We're going to be covering sections 8 and 9 today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping points. The session is being recorded. It will be shared afterwards. So please, if you've not done so already, mute your microphone and disable your camera so that we can share these recordings safely without any data issues afterwards. And just a little point about questions and answers. I'm sure things will come up for you as we go through that you want to ask. So any questions, please just pop them in the question and answer box, and then we'll look at what we have time for at the end. Thank you. So our agenda today is to look at tasks 8 and 9, the 2 writing tasks. They're very different, so I'm going to be providing an overview of each task. We'll consider what's being tested, and we'll look at how it's marked. I've got extracts from the marking criteria that the examiners use, and I'm going to take you through those so that you can see exactly how we approach your candidates' responses. Then finally, I'm going to suggest some approaches to the task in an exam setting and offer some tips for success based on some of the common errors that I see when I'm looking at papers. So just want to make the point that as yesterday, we are focusing on B2, which is level 3 of the test today. It's simply not possible to engage in any meaningful way with all of the levels in a webinar of this length. So we're going to go for B2 because it's the level with the highest entry. It's the intermediate level of the exam, so it provides a good central point of reference for you. Plus, because it's the level that I've worked on for a lot of years now, it's my area of expertise that I can offer specific insights into. So as I've said, we're going to look at the specific testing focus of each of the 2 writing sections. We're going to go over the marking criteria. We'll cover some of the common errors that can lose valuable marks for your candidates, and I'll offer approaches and tips. So let's make a start on section 8. So section 8 is what we refer to as the correspondence task. This is because it's linked to section 7, the final reading section that we looked at yesterday, and the input reading text for that task is used as the stimulus for section 8. So this is a writing task. It may take the form of an email or a letter, which could be formal or informal. And the idea is that the test taker is taking some of the information from the task that they looked at in the previous section and then reworking this in order to engage with a particular addressee for a particular purpose. The content of the writing is based on 3 bullet points, which are clearly set out in the task rubric. We need now to think about the word limit, because this might be a new piece of information for some of you. In the exam paper, the test taker is told that the word limit for the task is 90 to 120 words. You can see that in the rubric to the right. And I want to emphasise that this is very much what the test takers should be aiming to write. However, when we're marking the test, we have a little bit more leeway than that. The examiners work to and apply something called a word limit tolerance, which will hereafter be referred to as WLT, of 72 to 132 words. So, as long as the test taker has written between 72 and 132 words, then no penalties will be applied for this task. So I've popped a sample question just over on the right of the slide for you to have a look at. Those of you who were in yesterday's session will remember the section 7 reading task that we looked at, which was about the online fundraising platform Just Given. So this is the linked writing task to that. So section 8, use the information in section 7 to help you write your answer. We'll talk about what that means a little bit later on. Use your own words. So the actual question, you have read the Just Giving webpage. Now write an email to a friend suggesting that you do something together to raise money for charity. Write 90 to 120 words and include the following information. And here we have the 3 bullet points. Firstly, why Just Giving would be a good way of raising money. Secondly, some examples of activities that you could do together. And thirdly, a request for other ideas or suggestions. So what exactly are we testing on this task? We're assessing the test takers' overall writing skills, as well as their ability to express news and views effectively in writing, to explain their own point of view and express emotion in correspondence, to relate the content of the input text, that's the test text from section 7, to both task type and the addressee, to relate to the views of others, to engage with the views expressed in the stimulus text, and then to apply these to the addressee. So you'll notice that a lot of these relate to views and opinions, because the reading text for section 7 is an opinionated text rather than an informative text. How is it marked? We're going to come on to this in more detail in the subsequent slides, but essentially when examiners are marking the paper, we are scoring it out of a total of 29 marks. This is the raw score, and when all of the scores for the paper are assembled, it will be less than 29 marks for this section, but that's what we use when we're marking it. So let's have a look, let's have an overview of the marking criteria that we use for section 8. So this maximum total of 29 marks is made up of 6 separate scores that are then added together. So I'm just going to take you through these briefly, and then we've got full slides on each one and what it means. So firstly, we would look at task engagement, where up to 2 marks may be awarded. Then we would look at formal requirement. Again, up to 2 marks can be awarded here. And then we would move on to the 4 what we call qualitative traits, which are based on level descriptors within the Common European Framework. So these are the same for section 8 and section 9. We would look at range, where up to 5 marks may be awarded. We would look at accuracy, again, up to 5 marks. Coherence and cohesion, up to 5 marks. Orthographic control, up to 5 marks. And once we've done those, we would look at the individual trait for this task, which is unique to section 8. Section 9 has its own individual trait. And in this instance, that's overall written interaction, which again carries a maximum of 5 marks. So let's go on now to having a look at what these mean so that you get some understanding of how your test takers gain and lose marks. So the first trait that the examiner will look at is task engagement, where a maximum of 2 marks are available. The test taker would score 0 if there was no task engagement, i.e. the test taker has written about something else. They would score 1 if there is partial task engagement, so perhaps some but not all of the bullet points from the rubric have been addressed within the word limit tolerance. They would score 2 marks if there is full task engagement. That would mean that all of the bullet points in the rubric have been addressed within the word limit tolerance. Task engagement, as you'll see here, functions as something that we call a gatekeeper. So what does this mean? It means that if the test taker scores 0 for task engagement, then the other traits on the marking criteria will not be marked and the section as a whole will score 0. So, in other words, if the test taker has written nothing or has written about something else, then we would not continue to mark task. Let's have a look now at formal requirement, which engages with the word count and the response format. And again, a maximum of 2 marks are available here. One of the marks is available for the word limit, the other mark is awarded in relation to the format of the response. So here, no marks would be awarded if the response does not comply with either the word limit tolerance or the response format. So if it's too short or too long, or it's in the wrong format, for example, they've given us a shopping list instead of an email, then they wouldn't get any marks here. 1 mark would be awarded if either the response format or the word limit tolerance are correct. And the full 2 marks would be awarded if both the response format and the word limit tolerance are correct. So formal requirement here functions as what we call a partial gatekeeper. What does this mean? It means that if the word count is below the lower word limit tolerance, so for this particular task on level 3, if the test taker has written fewer than 72 words, then they would score 0 for formal requirement and 0 on all of the other traits for section 8. We do count the words, we are meticulous about this, so it does mean that unfortunately if someone had written 70 words for this response, then they would score 0 across the board. So if the word count is above the upper word limit tolerance, so for level 3 on task 8, if they've written more than 132 words, then the part of the response that falls above the upper tolerance is not considered when marking the qualitative traits. We would just ignore it. And this can also have a knock-on effect on task engagement, because if one of the content bullet points has been addressed outside the upper word limit, then we would only be able to award a partial score for task engagement. So I hope that that makes sense. Let's move on now to the qualitative and individual traits. So once we've passed the gatekeeper, examiners will work through the 4 qualitative traits that we discussed earlier. So these are range, accuracy, coherence and cohesion, orthographic control, and then the individual trait for section 8, which is overall written interaction. So each trait will be awarded a score of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It will only score 0 if the test taker hasn't passed the gatekeepers, which would be if nothing has been written, if the response is shorter than the lower word limit tolerance, if the response is irrelevant about something else, or, as sometimes happens, if it's not in English. So what do these scores mean? So all the time we're relating test takers' performance to the descriptors in the Common European Framework. So a score of 1 would mean that the performance is below the level of the CEF descriptor. A score of 2 would mean that it is just at the level of the Common European Framework descriptor for this level. A score of 3 would mean that it clearly matches the descriptor. A score of 4 would mean that the test taker's performance is approaching the next level of the Common European Framework descriptor. So when we're marking, for example, level 3, we would award a score of 4 if we felt that the test taker is actually using some of the skills that would be required at level 4. We would award a score of 5 if the performance is at the next level of the CEF descriptor. So when we're marking, the examiners always have the descriptors for level 2 and the descriptors for level 4 with them, and we use those to judge if the candidate is at our level or is at the level below or above. So what we'll do now is we'll go through these traits individually, and I'm aiming to give an understanding of what we're actually looking for. So for range, the Common European Framework descriptor for level B2 assesses whether the test taker, and I quote, has sufficient range of language to be able to give clear descriptions, express viewpoints on most general topics using some complex sentence forms to do so. What's the examiner actually assessing here? Well, we're looking for the lexical and grammatical range. We're looking to see whether the test taker has enough language at their fingertips. This is both vocabulary and grammatical structures to communicate clearly and with the complexity that we would expect at intermediate level. So it's not so much about spotting mistakes, because sometimes we might see an error-free piece that just uses some basic structures. And if it's not using the language that we would expect at level 3, it would probably come in with a score below the level here. We're looking to see whether the test taker is able to communicate about the topics included in the test paper. Do they have the language at their disposal that they need? And again, just to emphasise, we take a positive approach to the marking. We're looking at what the test taker can do, and we're fitting that into our marking framework, rather than sort of spotting or counting errors. And I do want to emphasise here that the odd error would not prevent a test taker from scoring a particular mark at B2. We're taking a kind of more global or best fit approach. Let's move on to accuracy now. So here, the Common European Framework descriptor assesses whether the test taker shows a relatively high degree of grammatical and lexical control and does not make errors which cause misunderstanding. What's the examiner looking for here? We're looking to see the accuracy with which the lexis, the vocabulary, has been used, and we're also looking at the accuracy of the chosen grammatical structures. We're absolutely not expecting an error-free response to score 3 to be at level, but the examiner will be looking at the type of errors and the impact they have on the piece as a whole and on the reader's understanding of what's being written. When we move on to thinking about coherence and cohesion, CEF descriptor B2 assesses whether the test taker can use a limited number of cohesive devices to link his or her utterances into clear, coherent discourse, although there may be some jumpiness in a long contribution. What does this actually mean? What are we assessing? We are looking at the overall cohesion of the piece of writing. We're looking to see that points are presented in a logical order, so good planning really helps here. We're looking to see how well it hangs together, how well it all sits. Does it flow? Does it have an overall direction? Does it take the reader on a sensible and logical journey through the response? We're also looking at the use of cohesive devices. We're looking to see whether they're being used, but importantly, whether they're being used naturally. Do they assist understanding? Do they aid the reader's journey through the text? They help connect paragraphs and link points smoothly. Now, I've written just as my last point here that sometimes less can be more. And I think every session, one of the comments that my team leaders will feed back to me is that sometimes we see too many cohesive devices. So I just want to make the point that it's not necessary for every single sentence to begin with a linking device. And I'm thinking here of our on the one hand, on the other hand, however, moreover, etc. They're more natural and more effective if they're used slightly more sparingly. And I think what tends to happen is that test takers know that they have to include these to get marks, and they do. So there can be a little bit of a temptation to put them in everywhere. So that's something that you could really work on with your learners, is this natural use of cohesive devices and discourse markers. When we are considering orthographic control, we are considering whether the test taker can produce clearly intelligible continuous writing which follows standard layout and paragraphing conventions. Spelling and punctuation at level 3 are reasonably accurate but may show signs of mother tongue influence. So what are we actually looking at here? First of all, is the handwriting legible? Is it possible to read what the test taker has written? Now, I'm very aware that some of our test takers, when they're writing in English, that means that they're writing in a different script from their native language, and that can be challenging, but it is really worth kind of putting some time in to make sure that the handwriting physically can be read easily. We're looking to see if the writing is paragraphed usefully. So at level 3, at B2, if the text is not organised into paragraphs, then the maximum mark that can be awarded here is 3 for this category. And the reason for that is that when we get up to level 4, useful paragraphing is an essential part of the grading descriptor. So they can't get more than a 3 if there are no paragraphs. I know sometimes it can be easy to forget to put the paragraphs in when you're in a stressful exam situation, but do make your test takers aware that they can use the // to indicate where the paragraph would have gone, and we would recognise that as a symbol. We're also looking here to see how accurate the spelling and punctuation are. Again, we're not expecting error-free writing for a score of 3, but we will be checking that the lexical items expected at B2 are spelled correctly. We're looking to see if there's a reasonable range of punctuation being used effectively, and that the test taker is not making basic errors. So we would, at level 3, be expecting all simple lexis to be spelled properly, but if the test taker is being a bit more adventurous and using some more subject specific, some more complex vocabulary, then you know, the odd spelling error would be okay, as long as we could understand what's being written. In terms of punctuation, I think at level 3, we are looking to move a bit beyond simple sentences and just the use of capital letters and full stops. We'd want to see some question marks, some commas used properly, perhaps colons, semicolons, maybe the odd exclamation mark, but not too many of those. One point that I would pick up on is that sometimes we see responses where the test taker has written completely in block capitals. This obviously isn't ideal, but at level 3, I can't speak for any other levels. At level 3, we would not penalise this, because we do, you know, recognise, as I said earlier, that somebody may be writing in a different script and that using block capitals might be the easiest way for them of producing writing that is legible. So now we're going to move on to the individual trait for this task, which for section 8 is overall written interaction. So here, the CEF descriptor for level B2 assesses whether the test taker can express news and views effectively in writing and relate to those of others. So what does this translate to? What are we looking for? We're looking to see whether the test taker has engaged with the views presented in the stimulus text and whether they are able to relate these ideas to their addressee, the person they're writing to in section 8. So in other words, is the test taker able to be flexible with language and address and to switch between the two texts? We're looking to see if the response as a whole is clear, is easy to follow, and remains engaged with the task. So it's a kind of, in some sense, it's almost like a global criteria that we're applying here. So I'm just going to offer some approaches and tips based on my observations over the years. Firstly, I would always encourage test takers to spend a little bit of time planning a writing task. I think the temptation in a time-pressured situation like an exam can be just to start writing, but actually that's false economy, and achievement will be much better if a little bit of thought has gone into it first. So really important to read the instructions, to read the rubric of the question carefully, to make sure that you understand the task requirements and that you include everything you've been asked to. It's worth revisiting section 7 and just quickly rereading that text, thinking whilst you're doing so, which bits of it will be useful for the section 8 writing, which bits might you use. It's really important not to copy the input text word for word. We call this lifting, and it will lead to a loss of marks across all traits. So when our examiners are marking this task, they all have the section 7 text in front of them, and so they will spot any bits that have been copied. It's absolutely fine to paraphrase the text. This is a really good skill, and we'd see this as a plus in this task. It's also fine to pick very short phrases from it or odd words. Again, this shows that you're able to manipulate the input text for your own purposes, but please, please, please don't take big chunks from it. Really important to plan the writing. So I would suggest thinking about how many sentences are needed in order to address each bullet point in the rubric. Some of these might not require much writing, others might need a little bit more. It is a really tight word limit tolerance on this task. 132 words isn't very many, so really crucial to use the available words wisely and make sure that they're used to address the content bullet points. So each session Lots and lots of candidates lose marks on formal requirement for writing too much. As I've said before, we do count the words, it's part of our job. So we will spot it if someone's written more than 132 words. Usually, candidates who exceed the word limit have done so because they've engaged in excessive kind of chat or small talk at the beginning of the writing. And I think if you just think about it for a minute, it's easy to see how that can happen, because we all want to be friendly, we all want to be chatty at the beginning of an email. But by the time you've said, hi, I hope things are really good with you, I'm sorry I've not written for a while, I've been very busy at work, I think you can see just how that 3 or 4 sentences could end up taking up almost a quarter of the words that are available for this task. So I'd really advise just one sort of polite, friendly intro sentence at the beginning, no more, and then going straight into the main part of the response. And obviously, if we, as we discussed before, if the response is too long, then there's a risk of losing a task engagement mark too, as one of the bullet points might fall outside of the 132 word upper tolerance. So do decide on the order of the points in the answer as part of the planning. It doesn't have to be the same order in which they appear in the rubric. Also, it's worth considering the register and tone that's needed for this piece of writing. Is it a formal task? Is it informal? Excuse me. So an email potentially would be semi-formal. So think about the language that you're using in relation to this. So for example, should you be using contractions? Should you be using idioms? Or are they not appropriate with the register that you're needing to use? Make sure that there's a greeting and a signing off, and that this is appropriate to the formality of the piece. So for example, if you've been asked to write a formal letter, don't begin high and end with lots of love. That's something that you can practice with your candidates. Check the work carefully at the end, and things that I would suggest checking for are the word count, content, have all the bullet points been addressed? Is the writing accurate? Think about the grammar, spelling, the punctuation. Think about paragraphs, use the double slash if they've been forgotten. Look at the linking devices. Are there enough of them? Are there too many? Are they natural? Are they appropriate? And check whether there's a greeting and a sign off. So I've just popped in here a sample response for level 3 for this task, just so that you get an idea of something that's broadly at the level. So, hi John, you know we discussed the last week about do something to raise money for charity. Well, I found a great website that can help us. It calls Just Giving and seems as very popular. That's why I think it's good for us. How it works, we decide the charity we want to support, choose from the site or do one ourselves, then make a page on the site. We can add photos, videos, text and others to tell our story and share with friends. We have there a lot of ideas to raise money. For example, we do trekking. This one raises more money. Or maybe make a little sacrifice and stop to eat chocolate, for example. But I know you love this. Anyway, write soon and say what you think. And if you have any more things you want to suggest, your friend Anna. So just briefly, this one is broadly at the level. It engages with all aspects of the task. It is too long, it's more than 132 words, so it loses a mark on formal requirement. The range is fine. The test taker has enough language to say what they want to say. For accuracy, cohesion and orthographic control, it's kind of just, it's at the lower end of the level. There are some errors which impede on the reader's experience. We could do with 1 or 2 more linking devices in here, and there are some spelling errors. But broadly speaking, it's at the level and remains fairly clear and coherent despite the errors. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our work on section 8. We're going to move on to section 9 now, which isn't going to be as long because most of the stuff we've covered already when we've been looking at the marking criteria. So section 9 we would refer to as the independent writing task, because it's not directly linked to the other sections of the paper, although it will share common themes. So here we're testing the ability for the candidate to write short text based on personal experience, knowledge, or imagination. There's a choice of two options, two topics, and the task could be an essay, a review, or an article. The writing required could be factual, critical, or analytical. So there may be a short input text, which you can see in option A to the right of this slide. That could be something like an advert or a brief notice in something like a college magazine to introduce the topic. So the word limit published on the exam paper is 150 to 200 words. That's very much what candidates should be aiming for when they're planning their response. But as per the other writing task, the examiners apply a word limit tolerance when marking. And for section 9, that's 90 to 220 words. So just to be clear here, anything below 90 words would score 0 across the board because they haven't written enough. Anything that's over 220 words, we would just be ignoring anything that comes after that upper tolerance in our marking. So you've got your sample questions here. A, we want to hear your opinion. Tell us why school is important and why you should bother to get a high school diploma. The best responses will be published here in your school newspaper. So that's an invitation to respond to that notice. And we've got the second option here. Do computers save people time, or do they cause people to waste more time? Write an essay, give reasons and examples to support your ideas. So let's look at exactly what's being tested here and how it's being marked. So we're testing, in addition to overall writing skills, we're looking at the ability to write clear and detailed text on a topic of interest. We're looking at the test taker's ability to synthesize, to pull together from different sources, different types of information to support the points being made. So those could be facts, they could be figures, they could be personal experiences, opinions. We're assessing the ability to create and sustain an argument, if that's what's appropriate, and the ability to support or refute a particular point of view. So as per section 8, it's marked out of a total of 29 marks, using most of the same criteria as section 8, but a different individual trait. So rather than overall written into action, for section 9, we're using something called overall written production, which I'm going to explain on the next slide. So for overall written production, the CEF descriptor for B2 is there to assess whether the test taker can write clear, detailed texts on a variety of subjects related to his or her field of interest, synthesizing and evaluating information and arguments from a number of sources. So what does this mean for the examiner? What are we looking for? We're looking to see whether the test taker can present an argument with appropriate supporting detail. So not just saying what they think, but saying why they think it and selecting relevant points and information to support that. We're also looking to see whether the test taker is able to consider other points of view and perhaps evaluate, critique them, refute them as part of a sustained argument, lend weight to their own. So my tips for this task would again be to read the instructions and the rubric carefully to fully understand the task requirements. Every session, unfortunately, we do receive responses that haven't engaged properly with the task. They will be penalised when we're marking, and I've got an example of that to show you on the next slide. So do spend a few moments and think carefully which is the best task option to choose. Firstly, consider which is more interesting, which is more engaging for you, which do you have more experience with, but also importantly, think which task is more accessible to you in terms of language. You know, where do you have the most kind of language at your disposal? Which would you do best at? Pay attention to the instructions about the format required and make sure you adhere to the conventions of that format. So, for example, an essay would have an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion, and we'll be looking for that when we're marking the piece. As I've said, test takers often lose marks because they write an essay that only partly engages with the task. As per the other writing task, it's good practice to plan the writing, make sure it's well organised, make sure it's easy to follow, and divided into paragraphs. So part of useful planning might be to jot down some keywords, or perhaps make a note of the arguments for and against something. Make sure that you've used interesting and varied language, both in terms of structures and vocabulary, and check the writing through carefully at the end. Sometimes, obviously, timing is an issue, but well worth, if you can, just building in 5 minutes to check things through. And the things, again, to look for that could have an impact on marks are the overall word count, the content, have all elements of the question been addressed, form, is the writing in the correct format, is it accurate, check the grammar, the spelling, the punctuation, and check for paragraph usage and appropriate use of linking devices, remembering that the double slash can indicate paragraphs if they've been forgotten. So our last job for today is just to have a look at a sample response for question 9, section 9, which hasn't scored any marks, because I'd like to show you how this can sometimes happen, in the hope that you can then discuss this with your candidates and it's something that can be avoided in future sessions. So this is a response to the second option on this question paper. Do computers save people time, or do they cause people to waste more time? Write an essay, give reasons and examples to support your ideas. So here's the response. Computers and technology things are a big topic nowadays. Here I will give my opinion on this matter. It's often argued that since the computers invented, they're helping us a lot. Thanks to them, we can stay in touch with friends and families. We can do homeworks or write anything we want easily. Another thing they let us to do is to entertain us, watching movies or playing games. On the other hand, we can say that there are some disadvantages with technology, especially for the children. Many times they become addicted on computers or other screens, and they don't talk with friends or go outside. This is bad for the health. On balance, I truly believe that computers can be a good thing, but we must control how the children use them. So, unfortunately, this response scored 0 because it was considered not to have engaged with the task, and therefore the remaining traits were not marked. So I hope you can see that there isn't any kind of reference to computers in relation to saving or wasting time. I think what's probably happened is that the test taker has practiced a fairly general essay on the advantages and disadvantages of technology in our society, and they've simply reproduced this in an exam situation without carefully looking at the task and writing something that's specific to the question asked. So I've put this in really as a cautionary tale and something to show you. We hate awarding tasks 0. We really don't like doing it. So hopefully this is something that you can share with your candidates. So that brings us to the end. I can see that there are some questions in there. Ben, are you there?
Sorry, I was struggling to get my audio back on then.
Ah.
I was talking away and then realised I was on silence. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Faith. Wonderful, very informative, and I'm sure it's very useful to many people. Okay, so there were a few questions. Okay, I'll just pick out a few because, as I said, we are running out of time. But please remember as well that, you know, if you have any further questions after this, do get in touch with your local Pearson representative, okay? So for those of you who are based in Spain or Portugal, that would be myself. And then, you know, if you're outside of that region, then please contact your regional representative. So a couple of questions I'll pick out, okay? One of them being, will half points be given?
No.
No. There we go.
Full marks only.
That was a very quick answer. Fantastic. Okay, and another one.
And I will say actually that if part of our examiner training is that if we're kind of wavering between 2 marks, say whether to award 2 or 3, we are told to go for the lower one of the 2. So sometimes we think we'd like to award 2.5, but we actually can't.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you very much. And another one that I'd like to pick out. Are contractions counted as 1 or 2 words?
Technically 2.
2 words in the word count. Okay. And okay, there are many questions saying about the recording of this. Just to reiterate, yes, this is being recorded and they will be made available once the entire series has finished. Okay, so not immediately, but once the series of webinars is finished, we have this week, next week, and then 2 days the week after, okay, which we do, which also answers one of the other questions, which is how to cope with student testing distress during a test. Well, one of the seminars we're doing on the last 2 days, so not next week, but the first 2 days of the week after, is talking about how to look after yourselves as teachers. Another one is talking about how to look after your students. Okay, and
so Ben, what point do people get the kind of takeaway sheet I prepared?
That will be at the same
we've
time
got that to go.
when we send out the certificates as well, because we're sending out certificates for it. You know, you will receive a summary takeaway sheet as well as the recording, so all of the information included, be able to take away. And the last question I'll pick out, and that is, what about the use of pencils? Some students want to write some ideas in pencil and then make a clear copy in pen. Are they allowed to do that?
That's fine. What's really important is if they're writing a draft and then rewriting it, which, you know, is a great thing to do if they've got the time to do that, they need to make it really clear which is the draft and which is the version that they would like us to mark. Otherwise, really, we're supposed to look at the first one which appears on the page. So I would strongly recommend that if they do that, they very clearly put a line through the draft and make sure that the examiner can see it's a draft. Mm-hmm. The other sort of tip I would give in relation to that is sometimes we see a situation where the response has been drafted in pencil and then they've gone over it in a pen. Mm-hmm. And that can sometimes be really difficult to read once the papers have gone through our scanning facility. Mm-hmm. So that's perhaps not such a great thing to do because it can become quite unclear with the sort of double writing.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks again, and thank you, Faith, for a wonderful session, and thank you everybody for attending. I hope that everybody is safe and well, and that you join us for the other webinars in the series. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I hope that was useful. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Faith.
Yeah, I've got it.
Still rolling.